I'd like to talk about my early days of flying and how I got into it. I was bitten by the aviation bug very early in my years, and I had problems because each time an aeroplane went over the top, our house where we lived was in Mount Lawley, and we were on the edge of the circuit area at Maylands Aerodrome, and wonderful aeroplanes were coming over like Vickers Viestras and de Havilland 50s and so forth. And I would run out to look at these aeroplanes, and my mother would scream out at me, "Don't slam the back door." And that went on until one day I found myself fascinated at these aeroplanes, and I could actually see the pilots in them. They weren't very high in the circuit area, and I fell over backwards onto the lawn, looking up at them. And my mother said, "Well, that'll teach you." Well, when I went to school, one of the primary school, Inglewood State School I went to, one of the teachers had a book called Smithy, and she went through this book and read it out to the class, and I was fascinated by the journey of Kingsford Smith and his crew of Warner and who was the other guy? I forget his name now. Oh, well, Alm was his co-pilot, and Warner was an American. I think he was a radio operator, and he had a navigator as well they picked up in the United States. And they flew the Pacific and landed in Honolulu first of all, and at Wheeler Field, which later on in life, when I was in Honolulu, I went to have a look at Wheeler Field, and sure enough it was not really the ideal place to operate an aeroplane for and try to take off to fly across the Pacific. Anyway, Kingsford Smith, while he was there, decided it wasn't good enough, and they eventually took off from Barking Sands, which was on the island of Maui, I understand, and then on to Brisbane. And they were acclaimed as absolute fantastic aviators, which they were. After that, they did a tour around Australia and went to capital cities of Sydney and Melbourne. They didn't land at Adelaide, they overflew, and they landed at Maylands. Well, I didn't exist in those days. That was 1928, and 8th of August they landed, 8th of August 1928 they landed at Maylands. And I have worked out from my birthday, which my birthday happens to be the 14th of February 1929. St. Valentine's Day, the centenary year of Western Australia. Well, I must have been a little bump in my mother's tummy, I think, at that stage, because that was exactly 9 months from when Kingsford Smith and his crew landed at Maylands. My parents went out to Maylands to be one of the crowd to greet him, and there were thousands there, and I've seen newsreel shots of this, and it was quite impressive. That time, first of all, my Uncle Dick, I don't know if he's Big Dick or Little Dick, but he took me out to Maylands with my brother, and paid some money to a mate of his who was flying Aero Club aeroplanes. I don't think it was the Aero Club of WA at that stage. Yeah, Australian Aero Club it was, yes. Anyway, I was put into the front cockpit of this de Havilland 60. There it is, well, it was up there, the HUJX. There it is. UJX was a de Havilland 60, and it was the first aeroplane I flew in, and I was in the front cockpit, and my younger brother, who was 4 years old at the stage, and I was 9, he was on my lap. No seatbelt, nothing, just away we went. And I was absolutely fascinated because we took off, and first thing I noticed that there were I'd never been in an aeroplane before, and below me were rivers and lakes, and I'd never seen so many lakes. I didn't know Perth had so many lakes and so much water. I was exhilarated by that, and thereupon I decided I had to fly aeroplanes too. So later on, when I became old enough, I joined the Aero Club at Maylands and learned to fly on Tiger Moths. My father happened to be friends with, and Uncle Dick were friends with Harry Baker. Harry Baker was one of the early pilots, and they knew him through their motorbike days and speedway days, and Harry Baker was a famous speedway rider before he became a pilot, and so they knew him. And around the corner from where we lived, just immediately around the corner, lived Stan Brearley. And Stan's really was the brother of Norman Brearley, yep. And Stan had a son called Morris, and so I played with Morris Brearley. I didn't realise that at the time that they were so much into aviation, but they were. Then lo and behold, later on, a man came to live opposite me, directly opposite, and I found out that he was a pilot flying Catalinas for Qantas from Perth to Colombo. He was on the flight of the Double Sunrise. That was Ivan Pearce. And I hung around Ivan like a bad smell, and he showed me his books and told me a bit about aeroplanes and flying them, and the next thing he asked if I'd like to go for a flight. He organised me to go for a flight in the Catalina on a test flight, and so that really sold me on getting to be a pilot myself, which I eventually did, and had a long career at it. My entire career was either working on the ground on aeroplanes or flying them. My entire working career.
Oh, Brian, you didn't mention that you worked at Maylands and you saw these aircraft, these fancy ones.
When I left school, I found employment with ANA, Australian National Airways Department of Aircraft Production, DAP, and worked on Ansons. And I was only 14 at the time. And the same aeroplanes that I worked on there, I found myself flying later on exactly the same aircraft. I could recognise some of my handiwork on them. So that was interesting too. When the war ended, I got the DCM, as a lot of us did, don't come Monday, and I went and started an apprenticeship with McRobertson Miller, and the famous Frank Cahoon. I came in the door, he knew what I looked like, and he gave me a job on the spot. So I was very, very happy with that. And I finished my apprenticeship with MMA, did that, got ground licenses, and then went into flying. Thanks, Brian. Is that enough time?
That's perfect.